Hello, this is Joachim again from the Open Science Data Center of the TR266 Accounting for Transparency. In this video, we're gonna use a forked repository and start a Codespace container in it so that we can actually start to code. So you wonder why one might want to do this. The answer is simple. In a forked repository itself, on GitHub, you can do changes by editing files, right? So I could click here and start editing the README file, but essentially what you want to do in a repository, you want to work with the code. So you want to run and execute the code, produce results, maybe change the code, produce new results. And for all this, you need to clone this repository somewhere so that you can actually work on it, right? Now, the easiest way, if you already have set up your local development environment, is to clone the repository in your local environment, okay? And we can do videos on this as well. But for starters, we want to assume that you don't have this local development environment. Maybe because you don't even own an appropriate device like a laptop, or because you have a laptop, but you didn't get around to set up, let's say, your local development environment in it. And this can also be true if you're actually a coding person, because maybe you have a local development environment for Python or for Julia, but you don't have one for R. And so this is more common than you think, that even seasoned developers develop in containers because they want to make sure that they have the right development environment that is required. So this is why GitHub has established the opportunity to actually work in the cloud. And this is called Codespaces, GitHub Codespaces. So this is super useful, and I will walk you through the process how to set up a little computer in the cloud so that you can work with this repository. So for this, you have to click Code, and then you have to click on the Codespaces tab, okay? Now on the Codespaces tab, you currently see that you have no Codespace, which is okay, but you can create a Codespace on the main branch of this repository. So the main branch is also the only branch that this repository have, so we can simply hit on click, and then the building process will start. So what you see here now is essentially a cloud instance of the development environment Visual Studio Code. Visual Studio Code is a very nice open source development environment, very powerful, very flexible. So we will talk more about this in other videos, but here it's just there to see that this is, let's say, the environment, the starting environment in which you will build and work, okay? Now, this container is actually being built as we speak, and you see that this takes a while because it has to download all its components from, again, the cloud, and then has to set up this container. So this takes a few minutes, so we will speed up the process eventually in this video. But for you currently, the only thing that you need to understand is that someone is working on your behalf, right? So you can sit down and sit back and relax and have a cup of coffee or whatever you fancy and wait for this Codespace container to be built. If you are interested in understanding, let's say, the technicalities behind it, we will have another video that walks you through the process of setting up customized development containers for your repositories. But for those of you that just want to use a development container, there's actually no need to look into all these details. You can just trust the developers that set up these containers that they will have a container that works for the repository that you will be working in, right? So currently what you see is that it already finished to set up the basic infrastructure, and it now starts to install additional R packages because the repository will be working with R mostly. So this is why we need an R environment with some specialized packages, and this is by now it's already done, right? And now it is also installing Quarto. Quarto is an offering environment that is super flexible. We will use it in later parts of this course and other videos. Now it seems that it also has finished that one. So it's actually starting the container up. So that was relatively quick, so it didn't take too long, right? And now while it starts, we can sit down and wait and talk a little bit more about what this development environment can do for you. So what you see here is Visual Studio Code. A Visual Studio Code has several components, right? So here in the left pane, you normally find the output of whatever you click on here, and by default, this is the folder structure. So that's the folder structure of the repository. So you can compare this with the repository that you'll see in the on GitHub. Most likely what you will observe is that the repository on GitHub looks a little bit different. This is simply because we have made changes to the repository in between. But here, for example, you see that by now it has rendered this file. So that's the README file here. So this is Markdown, so it's a text format, very simple. And here you can see actually the rendered variant of this. And this looks exactly like the README page that you see on GitHub, right? So, and here you also see the data folder, and in the data folder you see the data that we will be working with. This is the data from a paper that we reproduce. And here you have a scripts folder that has an R script. More on this in later videos, right? Now, you see that, right? You also see here, you see a terminal. So this is a terminal folder, which essentially is giving you the option to issue commands in this little cloud computer, in this little cloud instance that GitHub is sponsoring for you. When I say sponsor, it means that a GitHub account comes with a certain amount of free Codespace hours. So this is limited. You cannot run this container forever and ever. So I recommend you to use this as a starting point, and then at some point, if you grow more familiar with the process, you might also want to set up a local development environment so that you can do some of the work also locally on your computer to cut down on your cloud usage time. But for starters, this is a very efficient way to get into working with a repository. Yeah. So what else is here to see? You see that we have a Copilot pane, which is nice, because it helps us maybe to code later on. So we can ask questions to Copilot, and Copilot is also installed by default as an extension so that it will also help us with our code development. Plus, then we have something that we started here. Also by default in this container, we started RStudio Server, and RStudio Server is what we will use for the actual coding, because we are working in an R environment. And while you can of course also use Visual Studio Code to work with R, I think most students that are using R are more familiar with RStudio still. So this is why we will be using RStudio in another video for actually working with that repository. So this concludes this bite-sized open science video. What have we done? We have, based on a forked repository, started a Codespace development container in the cloud, and this container will allow us to actually work with the code. And we will do this in another video where we will start RStudio from this container, and then we will work within RStudio to run our script, the script that is in the repository. So hang on and have fun.